You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show for your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to have interviews from the world's best athletes, sports people, people who work in sports across a broad range of areas, coaches, trainers, sports psychologists. And we also have a segment which features speaking to some of the leading people in the field of psychology and related fields, give us an insight into their area of expertise and just a general insight into their thoughts and opinions in the area of psychology and mental health. Today we have a very special guest, really interesting guest, who's going to speak to us about her training and career and sort of what she does in her field of sport. She is the pilot of the Australian Bobsleigh Team. She also does some athletics coaching and public speaking too. So Bree Walker, great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on board.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board, Bree. I suppose we could sort of start from the beginning for our listeners in terms of how did you get into bobsleigh? Yeah, how did that sort of work out for you?
Well, originally I was a 400-meter hurdler, so I'd been doing athletics since I was a very young age, and I really had an ambition to compete for Australia at the Olympics. And after watching the Rio Olympics, I had to ask myself the big question was, am I going to be able to compete for Australia as a 400-meter hurdler? And I'd suffered a few injuries over the past few years, and so I was just like, no, I really don't think I'm going to be able to do this. So I just thought maybe my talents lie elsewhere. So simply I just Googled if Australia had a bobsleigh team, and we didn't at the time, but they were revamping the team for the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. So yeah, I simply just signed up for the talent identification camp, and the rest is history.
That's really interesting, you say, and it sort of goes to show that there are opportunities out there for athletes to sort of to transition. And what was it like for you, Bree, to make the transition? I mean, 400-meter hurdling, I would imagine, is different to bobsleigh, but what was it like for you? I mean, obviously you had the capability, the right sort of credentials there in terms of physiologically. But what was it like transitioning?
Yeah, the training is quite similar at the beginning. I feel like once you get to the higher levels, you start to become a bit more specific in your training, and it does become quite different to just say sprinting training. But yeah, I mean, I was very naive going into the sport, and now looking back, and I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but yeah, it was really a big whirlwind. I think I went to the talent identification camp at the end of August, and then I was off to Canada to learn how to drive a bobsleigh at the beginning of October. So it was a very quick turnaround. It was just like, it just all snowballed from the moment I decided to, switch over to bobsleigh.
And what would you say some of the challenges were, Bree, to do that? Was it technique? Was it the physical demands? What would you say the main sort of challenges for you to sort of make that transition?
Honestly, the main challenge that I experienced in the beginning was being able to fund my sport. There was no funding for bobsleigh. You simply had to do it out of your own pocket. And so within a month period, I had to raise all this money to be able to go over and even try the sport. Yeah. From there, there's of course you have challenges learning the sport. You're starting I was competing at a state and national level for 400-meter hurdles, and then I had to go all the way back down and start from the beginning with bobsleigh. So you of course have those challenges at the beginning, and then mentally it's just starting something new and having just the mentality to just go for it and put everything into it, because bobsleigh is a sport you definitely can't hold back on.
No, definitely. And I suppose competing in 400-meter hurdles would have you would have taken a lot of skills from there, and obviously it's a tough event, the 400 meters in itself. And
yes.
Did you find that doing the 400 meters and the demands of 400 meters training helped you in bobsleigh?
Yeah, definitely. I think just the resilience and the willingness to push your body to like those uncomfortable places. Like you said, 400 meters is not a friendly event. It's not a comfortable event. And bobsleigh can kind of be like that sometimes. You're getting up to speeds at 120, 130 kilometers an hour. And so if you, like, you're always nervous, but if you let the nerves take over and it becomes fear, that's when it can really, affect your performance. So you just kind of have to embrace the nerves in like a more positive way. And I look at it like, I'm ready for this. And that's how I guess 400 was able to help me with that. Like, there was times where you're like, oh no, I don't want to have to put myself through this pain that I'm going to go through in this race. But you just kind of have to like attack it head on. And and if you're able to do that, then you're probably going to be successful.
That's brilliant. Interesting stuff. And just for our listeners, in terms of bobsleigh, I mean, what's it like sort of training? What's the sort of training, physical training like for it, Bree? I know, obviously I'm sure there's going to be different types of training, different types of year, but what's the sort of general training that you would do to physically prepare for that?
Well, in the summer, I'm mainly doing dryland training, and this is preparing for my push start. So I work a lot weightlifting. We try and move heavy weights, yes, because our sleds are quite heavy. They weigh 170 kilos.
Wow.
But you want to be able to move that heavy weight fast. That's the difference there. And so we work on a lot of, strength-based stuff, plyometric-based training, and then sprint work. I don't do a lot of sprint training because a lot of people kind of think bobsleigh pushing is like sprinting, where it isn't really. So we do a lot of heavy sled pulls, which allows us to replicate the push start. And so that's pretty much our summer training. Once we come to winter, we do a lot of training, obviously, on the tracks. Each track is very different. And so we need to practice going down this track. So me as a pilot, I have to learn how to navigate a sled down the track. Down each track, and so it requires me to talk that out with my coach, and then obviously we have to work on the push start together as a team. So it's myself and my brakeman, and we just have to practice our push starts together so we can get the maximum amount of speed out of our push starts. That's
really interesting. And in terms of your role, I mean, the sort of the pilot you mentioned there, I mean, what does that involve for our listeners, Bree, sort of being a pilot of a bobsleigh team, and just sort of the gist of what you do, what your sort of role is within the team?
Yeah, so I mean, I take on a few different roles because we are a smaller nation in the sport with not much funding. But in general, I pretty much have to, like I said, learn each track individually and learn how to drive each track to the best of my ability. I also have to push the sled at the start with my teammate in the two-man event, but there's now a new Monobob event, and that's just an individual event, so it's me just pushing it at the start, but it's a different technique to the two-man event. So I've had to learn both techniques over the last few years. And then because, like I said, we're a small nation and we don't have that much support, I pretty much take on an organising manager kind of role. And I have to help organise my season. And so, that's kind of in the off season or in the summertime, that's what I've been doing. So currently I'm in front of my desk looking at all our season preparation and just making sure that we can execute the best season possible.
Brilliant. And sort of, what would that be for you, Bree? What was sort of, what would the aspiration be? I mean, you mentioned there sort of other nations as well. What would be your aspiration for the bobsleigh team? What would you like to achieve? What's the sort of plan?
Well, I feel like over the last few years we've really been progressing as a team. We've come from being a Europa Cup team that hasn't been very competitive to being a competitive Europa Cup team to then progressing to World Cup where we are now. And this season we were achieving top tens, which I'm not sure an Australian team, like consistent top tens, which I'm not sure an Australian team's been able to do in the past. So I really think we were turning heads this year, and which was really exciting. And then in the Monobob, I obviously won a few competitions in the Monobob event, which is really exciting for everybody involved. And so I guess our aspirations is to continue to progress in both the two-man and Monobob event. I'd love to be continuing to hit podiums in the Monobob event, and then obviously progressing to, I guess, those top 8, top 6 positions in the two-man event over the next few years. And then the big aspiration is obviously to qualify for the next Olympics, which comes up in February next year. And just see how we go there. I really just want to lay down my best performances there, and whatever the result, if I do that, I'll be happy with whatever the result is.
No, brilliant. And in terms of sort of mentally, do you sort of prepare mentally, Bree, for the events, or what's the sort of mental preparation like? Well, obviously you're sort of mentally strong, and you've got the 400-meter background, and you've sort of committed yourself and sort of gone for it. Do you have any specific mental preparation you do, or is this something?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we do mind runs, which is for me. I visualize going down the track and visualize what steers I want to complete in each corner. I also just have a lot of self positive talk that I do in preparation for each training run and each race. I feel like that's really worked quite well with me. This year I've gotten back into my yoga, which is really good because it allows me to just have that quiet time, peaceful time that allows my mind to clear from all the busyness that does go on in the world today.
Absolutely.
So it's just those kind of little practices that I've kind of developed up along the way that I know that works best for me. And I think that's what is the key for athletes. Like, you can always ask other people, what do you do, but you need to find what works best for you. And I guess I've kind of starting to figure out what works best for me.
No, brilliant. And what I find interesting, Bree, with yourself, and I ask this to the question to many athletes that I interview and sports people, at what point did you sort of realize that you had, something there that obviously you compete at a very, very high level, at the highest level against some of the top teams? Was there a point when you sort of thought, well, I've got this, I know I can sort of compete against these guys and sort of reach this sort of level?
I feel like there was a few moments over time. I always was I kind of knew that I had something in me, that I could be a successful athlete at the top level. But I guess it was over time with, I guess my work ethic really showed people that I was committed to my sport. And I started getting some really talented coaches on board to help me be successful. And I was like, why are they helping me? I don't understand why they're helping me. And I just kept going with them, and I kept getting better and better. And then obviously results came. I started winning races, and which was very exciting. I was like, oh, okay, but I want to be able to win races at the highest level. And everyone was telling me, you're talented, Bree, you're this, you're that. And I was like, nah, I want to be able to prove that to myself at the highest level. And I guess it was this season when I was able to go and win a few monobob races that I was like, I can see why, I have, institutes supporting me, and that was really exciting. And that was a realization that I was like, all right, I just need to reach for the stars here and see what comes out at the end of the day, because I do believe that I can be successful at the top level, because I guess I've proven it to myself over the years.
Absolutely, that's sort of really interesting, and I suppose for most of us, we'll never sort of get anywhere near a bobsleigh. If you sort of give us an idea, what's the adrenaline rush like, Bree? Just for our listeners, I can imagine sort of going at those speeds. It's sort of we don't reach those speeds driving in a car, let alone and it's just fascinating for me. But what's it sort of like the actual event itself, Bree? It must be like a buzz. I suppose you're focused on the technique and the performance, but is there a moment where you sort of, what's it actually like to sort of compete in that sort of event?
Oh, it's very exciting. I mean, if you're driving on the German Autobahn, you get to those kind of speeds.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, it is just a whole different thing. I think if you're driving 120 kilometers in a car, it doesn't compare to driving 120, 130 kilometers at a bobsleigh track. It just feels so much faster, and the G-forces really hit you. And I feel like when you hit a good run, like when you feel like the sled just building speed, it feels very smooth. That's the best feeling, because you know you're executing the best run that you possibly can, and then that even gets the adrenaline just really pumping. So yeah, I really love that feeling.
Absolutely, no, it must be sort of a buzz really to do that, and obviously the thrill of the competition too, and in terms of the times. And are you sort of aware? When you do compete, does it go really quick, or is it sort of slow motion in terms of you're sort of focusing on sort of the technique, the time, and sort of what's that like, Bree? Is it sort of the actual competition itself?
I mean, there's sometimes when I push off the start block and I'm like, oh no, that felt really slow, but they're often the fastest pushes. So I get really excited when I get to the bottom and I see my time, and that's the best kind of feeling, when you get to the bottom and you see you've pushed really fast and you've driven really fast. Yeah, they're the best. They're the best races, really.
So that's the key, to get off to a good start, a flying start, and then you sort of just build from that.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we work all summer on, is being able to, because that's the only speed that we can generate is from the start. So yeah, for me, that's what we spend all summer doing. And then during the winter, I work very hard on being able to drive the tracks to the best of my ability.
Brilliant. And so tell us a bit about the public speaking you do, Bree. Sort of what does that involve? Sort of, I mean, obviously it's quite an inspirational story, and I'm sure there's a lot of chapters to be written in your sort of story yet, and a lot you'll achieve. But just generally speaking, what does the speaking involve for you? Sort of, what sort of speaking do you do?
Yeah. Well, I'm a qualified PE teacher, and so I love working with kids, and I feel like when I was at school and I'd have public speakers come in, they were some of the days where I just a light bulb would go off, and I'd be like, yes, that person is so inspirational, and so that's really what I want to be able to do. So the public speaking that I really do is in schools. I love to be able to go and share my story in schools, and share how I've got to where I am, because hopefully it'll allow another student to have a light bulb moment. And then I often take my push sled to the schools, and they push the kids around there, and they just love it, So I haven't really done all that much in the last few years, because I've been in Germany, and that's where I'm based at the moment. But I can't wait to be able to go back to Australia and be able to do more of that stuff, because I really feel like for me it was a turning point in my life, some of those people. So I'd love to be able to do that for those kids.
And you maybe even inspire a generation of young people, Bree, who might sort of follow in your footsteps. That's a possibility, I guess, in terms of they might see it as an option. I suppose if a young sort of person coming through considered doing getting involved in bobsleigh, what would you say, Bree? What would your sort of, I know it's hard to give advice, everyone's different, but generally speaking, what would your sort of thoughts be?
That's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
I really do think that, especially in Australia, winter sports is a field that's so underrated.
Yes.
And there's so much opportunity out there for athletes to be able to go and give winter sports a try and be able to achieve their ambitions of competing for Australia at or competing for your nation at a top level. And for bobsleigh specific, I would really just I would love to be able to talk to them to see if they have the mentality to be able to do bobsleigh, because it does take a special kind of person to be able to do this crazy sport. But then it's just like the physicality, because it's such a, you can be such a fast sprinter, but if you move over to bobsleigh, often a lot of sprinters are not successful with pushing a sled, so you just have to be able to be so willing to just throw yourself at it, and then, you know, go back to the basics and be able to, you know, build yourself as a new athlete. And I think if people are willing to do that, you know, throw themselves into something completely new, and just willing to like have a very open mind to it, I think they would be successful.
That's really interesting, and some sort of good points there. I suppose in the end, it's, you can give it a go and see. But it's really interesting you said there. You know, being a sprinter obviously is one thing, and I suppose, you know, there are, you know, being a sprinter, obviously you've got, you know, some of the credentials, but then there's a lot of hard work on top of that, I would imagine, to keep going forward. But in terms of your vision, Bree, sort of going forward, I mean, sort of where do you sort of see yourself from? I know it's, you know, difficult to say, and there's a lot of variables in sports, but what's your sort of vision generally? You know, where would you like to be? What would some of the goals? Are you, if it's okay to share, maybe some of the goals that you have? Yeah.
No, I really want to be able to continue on to the next Olympics in Milan. I really think that I still have a lot more to give, and I think you get better with age with bobsleigh, especially as a pilot. So yeah, I really want to be able to continue on then. So I'm hoping that with our hard work and determination, more successes will come over the next few years, which will allow us to get more support in terms of the different institutes at home, and then more funding in terms of more sponsors on board. And then after that, I really do think I want to become involved in the winter sports within Australia. Whether that's recruiting athletes from different sports to come and try a sport like bobsleigh or aerial skiing or moguls, because that's the sports that Australia is quite successful in. Or whether it's actually being a part of building the bobsleigh culture in Australia, and just being able to create, you know, more teams, more athletes, and continuing on our legacy. Like, either way, I think that's the area that I want to become involved in. So yeah,
that's really.
I definitely see my my future being within winter sports in Australia.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Bree, that you mentioned that. And obviously, with yourself, sort of, you know, paving the way. You know, I know that you've learnt, you know, a lot, and with the experience, that sort of, you know, you're well placed to be able to sort of look at that and do that. But would you sort of see yourself eventually maybe in a role where you could identify potentially talented athletes like yourself who decide we'll try something different? Would that be something that would sort of you'd be aiming for eventually, you know, at some point, to sort of use all the experience you've gained from competing around the world and hopefully the biggest tournaments, and then be able to sort of say, you know what, we can identify talents that, you know, that haven't, or decide they want to maybe try something different? Would that be something that you could,
definitely. Yeah. I see so many, especially like track and field athletes who are at that kind of, they're not good enough to be able to compete on that national level, but they're just on the cusp of that. And they're the athletes that, like, we need to be able to transition over to a sport like bobsleigh, because maybe they're not suited to sprinting like I wasn't, but maybe their talents lie in a sport like bobsleigh. So that would definitely be where I would love to be involved in, because I just love providing people with more opportunities to be successful. And so yeah, for me, that's I see myself being in that kind of area, and I guess I have absolutely no idea how.
Yeah.
And I expect I will be kind of diving into that in, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years time. But yeah, that's kind of where I see myself heading.
No, that's great stuff. And I think, obviously you've got your own sort of career to focus on now, and I'm sure you'll sort of, continue to do really well. But it's great to have that in sort of mind, that's for sure. And I suppose in saying that, like you've mentioned before, the sort of funding situation. So hopefully, if there's sort of policymakers listening, and obviously sport means a lot to people, particularly in Australia, it's a sporting nation, and people love their sport, and it's really important that obviously funding is available as much as it can be. But that sort of plays a role. The actual funding situation is a big thing in for winter sports. Is that sort of an area that that you think would help a lot?
Yeah, I mean, after I didn't go to the last Olympics, the Olympic Winter Institute of Australia, they took a chance with me, and they provided me with a scholarship. And with that scholarship, I was then able to go on and win 2 monobob races the next year, and I think I also won a silver that year too, out of 5 races. And then that was like, that little bit of funding was able to kickstart me into such a successful career. And then from there, it just built and built and built. And so sometimes I think it like all athletes require is just that little bit of support, whether it actually does help them financially, or whether it just provides them with the confidence that people are supportive of them and encourage them. Like, if that just like boosts them to be able to go out and be successful, then I would love to be able to see what that does to different athletes in different sports. So yeah, and it's also the same with sponsors. If one sponsor comes on board, it just brings such a buzz to a team, and it just like provides you with the motivation to just go out and give it everything you have to go and be successful for like the people who are supporting you.
Brilliant, especially where the margins are so fine. We're sort of talking like split seconds here and there, and the training so essential. Being able to train and be completely focused is a big thing, really. But it's really interesting stuff, Bree. It's been really kind of you to come on board and speak to us, and I'm sure our listeners sort of, really sort of. It's been an eye-opener for them in terms of hearing about what you do and what it involves. But we really wish you all the best, and we'll certainly keep an eye out to see how you do in sort of forthcoming tournaments. In terms of what's next for you, Bree, sort of just so anyone listening sort of keeps an eye on your career, what's the next step for you? Have you got any sort of competitions coming up? I know we live in a world at the moment where a lot of things have sort of changed because of the pandemic, but all things being well, what's the sort of next competition for yourself?
Over the summer, I actually I train with the British Bobsleigh Team throughout the winter, and so myself, Brad Hall, and Misha McNeil, we all prepare for our season together, and once we hit October, that's when things really take off. So we start our season in China because we haven't actually slid the Olympic track yet. And so everyone heads over to China and just tries out the new Olympic track there. And then season really begins from there. So then we travel all the way around Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and we just have to compete in as many races as possible in the 2-man and monobob event. And I think by January 14th, we will know whether we qualify for the Olympics. So, yeah, I think you can tune in on the MBPsS YouTube page that tends to have a broadcast, or if you are in Europe, I think maybe only Germany really broadcasts bobsleigh, but because we were one of the only winter events last year to actually complete a full season, we were on TV quite a bit, so hopefully it's a similar thing this year. And yeah, if you tune in to wherever it's being broadcasted, you'll be able to see us competing.
Brilliant, Bree. No, I really appreciate you coming on board, and that's fantastic. We wish you every success in the future. That was Bree Walker, pilot of the Australian Bobsleigh Team. give us an insight into her career and her aspirations on Salford City Radio 94.5 FM Friday Sports with your host Jimmy Petruzzi.